Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that your name be glorified in ways that we may serve you and love you. Let us always recognize the signs you send to us of your presence, and we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, today is Wednesday, and here we are in the 17th week of Ordinary Time, and I've mentioned before, we're actually at that halfway point. Once Sunday comes, we are now in the second half of Ordinary Time, although Ordinary Time, remember, is in two parts, and so it's the first part that you experience in January, and then the second part you experience usually around June, which is what we're in the midst of, and that continues. This year, it's continuing right up through the month of November, which is rare, but it actually is. So anyway, we're looking at now this powerful first reading that comes to us from the book of Exodus. And now there is an additional sign, even though it's not mentioned that there is a sign, there is an additional sign of what we experience with Moses as he comes down Mount Sinai. Because now his face is radiant, and it becomes so radiant that he has to wear a veil when he's around other people because his face has become so radiant. And that's an important distinction, because even though it's not said specifically, what is actually said is that when Moses is speaking to God and he leaves, all of a sudden his face is radiant, but that is a sign. And remember what the Lord is doing at this time. He's communicating to the Hebrews that he is present among them. Remember last week when we heard the people who were grumbling. And why were they grumbling? Because they didn't have the faith to believe that the Lord would be with them. And who would they grumble against? They'd grumble against Moses. But where was the problem, so to speak? The problem was God. So why weren't they grumbling against God? And as we talked about yesterday, they were able to speak to the Lord in the tent, actually outside the tent, but now is being set up this direct connection with the Lord, and then also this connection through Moses. But they can sit before the tent to address the Lord. And this eventually becomes the precursor to what we call the tabernacle, which we have. It actually became the precursor to the Ark of the Covenant, and now the Ark of the Covenant is the precursor to the tabernacle, what we have in churches, Catholic churches throughout the world. So we've got all that, and we see that. So, but what's happened is, remember what you're going to see here, and you can see it in Jesus too, that the Lord is using Moses to teach his people to trust in him. And when they trust in him, their society goes very well, and it's filled with peace. It's when they don't trust in him and they trust in their own wisdom that things go wrong. Sound familiar? I hope it does. But that's where everything begins. Now, one of the things we have to understand, and people say this is my legacy, but look at it this way. You see people who are complaining to Moses, and they're through Moses complaining to God in a sense, although they could have complained directly to God. What do we see in our church today? We see people complaining that others are not living their faith, and they're complaining how they're living, and they're complaining what is going on, and they're complaining how and I'm not talking just in the church, they're complaining right across the whole context of society. They're complaining about all of this. Well, there's a thing we have to look at when we see that. They're not focused on them living their faith as much as they're complaining. And this becomes an important distinction. Now, we do understand that the Hebrews are now learning the Ten Commandments. They're at that point. Last week, they hadn't reached that point yet, so they didn't have the Ten Commandments. But now they're at that point, and we will see that through the rest of Exodus, where they begin to experience and learn of the Ten Commandments and the demands of the Lord. What precedes the Ten Commandments? Developing that experience with the Lord. Always keep that in mind. It was developing the experience with the Lord that came before living the Ten Commandments. Because you need A before you can do B. When you reverse it, it's a disaster. And that's what happens all the time. Now, one of my favorite saints is Saint John Vianney. And St. John Vianney talked about the importance, and you'll find this elsewhere, of us living our faith. That's how we preach the gospel. We don't preach the gospel by telling people that they're not living their faith. We preach the gospel by making sure we are. And how do we preach? We begin with that relationship, and then we build through that prayer relationship into how we live our faith. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from Allston, Massachusetts. Don't forget to tell others where they can find our program. You can hear us on WEZE 590 AM and WEZEradio.com at midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning, Monday through Friday, Eastern Time. We then podcast the program on your favorite podcast platform and at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also hear us on our parish website, ST for StAnthonyAlston.org. That's StAnthonyAlston.org. And let others know where they can find us and spread the word and subscribe to our podcast. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to our 10 o'clock a.m. Mass every single Sunday, so come check that out. By the way, that's a chanted Mass. In other words, what we do is instead of saying the responses from actually the end of what we would call the doxology, through him, with him, in him, that's the doxology. From the doxology straight till you receive communion, we chant all the responses. So come experience that, and you may enjoy that. So anyway, we're talking about this important reality that we understand how to live our faith. That's important. And the expression I like to use is bonking people over the head. When people come along and bonk them over the head because of the way they're living their life, and they bonk them over the head with the Bible and saying, no, you're supposed to be living this way. Well, that doesn't make any sense if they don't have that relationship. And so what we're seeing here is God is working on more and more signs to show the Hebrews that he is with them and to trust in him. Jesus uses the exact same technique, if you don't notice that. What does he do? Remember when he shuts down the storm? Isn't that an example of the same technique? Why are you afraid? He said to the apostles. It's the same technique. He even uses it when he is a child. When he is back in the temple and his parents are looking for him because they realize he's not with them, and then finally they find him in the temple, and right away. Well, his response could be put in today's words, where else would I be? Obviously, that's where I am. It was kind of a reminder is one of the things I like to tell people is if you can't find me, if you're saying, I know he's in such and such a town, but I don't know where he is. He's visiting today or something. Where are you going to look for me? And you have no idea where I am? I'm going to be in the library. Because, I love libraries. And that same idea is what Jesus is saying. Where else would I be? He says, obviously, in different terms. And that's the thing. It's, again, building and teaching and helping people to understand. And the Father does it, and now Jesus does it. We see when we read the Gospels. So this is an important distinction. The Lord is using Moses to teach the people to trust in him, and they have a really hard time doing that. And we know the result of that, which we'll talk about later, but we see that. So when Moses, his face is so bright, he has to wear a veil, it's that powerful moment that they realize something has happened. There's something powerful about God here. We're experiencing the Lord in a new way. We can learn to trust in him. Now, there's another part of this that you don't realize, and that is this is the first time this has happened. It's never been experienced by the Hebrews when they were in Egypt. Remember, what was that line? Why can we go back to Egypt? They didn't have any problem with food. Why can't we go? Remember, that's a grave sin. Well, what are they experiencing now? Moses speaks to God, and then when he finishes, they realize he has to wear a veil because his skin is so bright. That never happened with any of the Hebrew gods. And don't forget the Rational Bible series by Dennis Prager. What an excellent series. But one of the things he brings out with Exodus is all the plagues are there as like a show of God's power over all the false gods of Egypt. So this is another one where he's letting them know he is the true God. And that's an important distinction because we have to understand there is only one God, and through the Jews we come to realize that. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, right here on WEZE. Have yourself a blessed day. This is Father Robert J. Carr wishing you a great, blessed day. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation through the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.